I'll start by giving away my research just in case I run out of time. Yes, people use the internet even in the countryside, and sometimes they use it in unusual ways, in unexpected ways. And these, might look like quotes that I put there as a bit of a joke, but in fact, they're all real. So Mrs. So Young on the right, she's 58 years old. She didn't even finish elementary school, and yet she plays cards online on QQ with strangers, and she does video conferencing. The woman in the middle, she denied having anything to do with computers. She denied ever having seen a computer. Then the woman on the right, Mrs. Stout, told her, but yes, do you remember? It's like the television, except that there's your grandson on television. And then she said, oh yes, then I remember. It turned out that she also regularly used video conferencing to talk with her son and grandchildren. And finally, Mrs. Tao, she actually read novels on her mobile, even though she also could not use the internet and use a computer to download these e-novels. So in this paper, I want to try and take a different look at what is happening in the countryside in terms of internet use. So there's this rather puzzling statistic that shows that, yes, the number of internet users in the countryside is increasing, I think, by 11 million year to year in the last statistics, but percentually is going down. Which is a little counterintuitive because the infrastructure is getting better, the prices of access, so internet access, ADSL access in the countryside is also getting better. Rural incomes are increasing, more young people are going back to the countryside. Computers and internet are taught in school, in at least middle schools, even in the countryside. So how come that the decreasing, where does this decreasing percentage of rural netizen come from? And these are great numbers because you can't really explain them with other numbers. You really have to go and do an ethnography and look at how people use the internet. Because if you just ask any of these three people in the first slide, or ask pretty much any rural resident, do you use the internet? The answer is, well, I can't. No, I can't. And then you look at them and you see that the internet is everywhere, and even people who don't use it, in fact, talk about it, just at nighttime when everybody rests from the daily farming work. So they just chat about who's doing what, who's dating whom, who's found a girlfriend online. And so even older people know everything about the internet. So this is where I did my field study in 3 villages, 1 in Hebei and 2 in Shandong. And I really look at the process of domestication of information communication technologies, specifically today of computers. So it's the process rather than looking at whether people are a user of the internet or not, whether people go online and not. By looking at the process, you can see things that kind of get lost in statistics because there is a lot of on and off patterns of usage. So people who might use the internet in the wintertime when they have time, but not in the summertime. There's a lot of dependent use, so people who depend on other people in order to use the internet. And sometimes this dependency is temporary, so if it's a young kid is learning to use a computer, but then when they grow up they can use it by themselves. Sometimes it's a forever dependency. Older people, unless the usability of computers changes dramatically, will not be able to start typing pinyin and use browsers. But if someone helps them, they can use it. So I'm looking at all these different patterns of use. And basically, there have to be 3 factors in order for use to come together and be sustained. And one is the technology, so having access to a computer and the internet. One is the opportunity, so someone who teaches you how to use the technology. And the third is the motive, which is particularly important to sustain the use. So, is there something of interest for you on the internet? So very briefly, the technology part, how people get a computer. So I should first say that there's plenty of people in the countryside, mostly young people, so school-age children and return migrants, people in their 20s, who use the internet exactly as people do in urban areas. So They go to internet cafes, sometimes they have computer, they know Pinyin, they can search, they can browse, everything else. But I choose to focus on more unusual uses because these are the types of uses that don't get captured on statistics. So, someone like a little girl, 5 years old, I think it's even too young to be considered an internet user according to the Chinese internet statistics. A middle-aged man, a middle-aged woman, and an older woman. And so you can see that in these cases, the computer tends to be a gift from someone else or to belong to someone else, except for the man there. Now, learning. So these people usually depend on other people to learn. The young Miss Kong was taught by her aunt, who had bought a computer for herself, and her aunt taught her how to look for games by just clicking because she couldn't read. And so she could certainly not search for things. So she learned to click, and then she learned also to use video QQ. And now that her aunt has left, she uses it to keep in touch with her aunt. In the case of Mr. Lee, so there are independent private attempts. There is a marked gender difference, especially with middle-aged people, where women are more willing to ask for help. They take the position that the computer is something for men, something for young people, and so in their ignorance, self-professed ignorance, they don't have any problem in asking over and over and over and bugging their children until they learn how to do what they're interested in doing. Men are more reluctant. They kind of long for the days of mechanic technology where you could take the thing apart and see how it works, which you can't really do with a computer. And so Mr. Lee was playing around with learning how to use the computer, but would not ask his son for help. And there were a lot of frustration with this. So he would say, well, I don't really use chat because we countryside people can't really type Pinyin. We're too slow. We type with one finger. Then his wife told the other side of the story. She said that one day he was playing cards on QQ with 3 strangers, and he and his card teammate lost. And his teammate sent through text a string of curses. And Mr. Lee wanted to reply in kind, so laboriously typed using Pinyin all the curses. And when he had his nice curse ready, he didn't know how to send the message. And so that put an end to his attempts to send messages. Mrs. Yang also has learned through her daughter and then her neighbor, the wife of Mr. Lee. And Mrs. So Young has never really learned. She's just seen her son using the computer. And one day she saw him playing cards. And playing cards is something that's related to her daily activity. So it's like, I can do that. Teach me how to do it. So what do they use the internet for? Well, it's something we have talked about for the past day and a half, for playing games and chatting. And that's really true throughout. I mean, playing cards is an activity that you see everywhere in street corners in the villages, and then you also see it online. And this is telling because it's something that people can understand. It takes the daily practices of the villages and brings them online. So there isn't much of a mental model that needs to be recreated. Mrs. Young really liked to go dance in the street at night, as it happens in the city. So for her, having access to the internet would mean be able to find new dance videos and teach to other people. So that was her motivation to keep on using the computer. And of course, Mrs. Oh Young playing cards and video conferencing with her grandson. So the internet really reflects the social environment of the countryside. There is a lot of collaborative work. So people, you can see here, this was the corner where people would have to stop on their way to the fields and back from the fields. So that was the place where you'd go and find out what was going on in the village, what were the news, etc. And so that was where a lot of people talked about technology. So if someone had a new mobile, other people would help them how to make it work, how to take pictures, and then they would talk about technology, etc. There is also a lot of gaming and entertaining use, which is often labeled as a waste of time, but in fact is a way that, first of all, of entertainment, which is great because the countryside is, in fact, a very, very boring place. And then it's also a way to get familiar with the technology and then eventually move on to other kind of activities. And so, you know, when you see the next statistic about how the internet is not really taking hold in the countryside because people have less education, people have less income, and they just don't know what the internet is, think about these people and you'll maybe see a different picture. Thank you.